Coming up, the New York Football Giants are on a bye week, but that doesn't mean there isn't football action that matters to Big Blue. We're going to break down the games this week that you should have your eyes on, the debate that will be going on inside the building between Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito, and ultimately, why the fan base should never put all of its eggs into the top draft pick basket too soon. Yes, sir. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz. Thanks for being a part of the journey, guys. Straight through the bye week as we hit the back half of the season for the NFL. We're already a few games down that road here, but it brings us to the point, Andy, as the Giants are on the bye week. We've got a handful of games to watch. If you think, for better or worse, the NFC is open enough for the Giants to compete for the playoffs. We've got a handful of games to watch if you want to see them climb the draft pick ladder, and the big debate around Tommy DeVito and Tyrod Taylor. And I think this serves whichever agenda you want in terms of who you want to be starting coming out of the bye against Green Bay.
Yeah, listen, the weather's starting to turn here. It's starting to feel like winter, right? It's 25 degrees. It's cold. I'm feeling better about the Giants wins because I want something to matter, Adam. It would be even worse if the team was really stinking, like they were even worse than the New England Patriots. And you're sitting there and it's 22 degrees on Sunday and you're like, oh, I just want to cozy up inside and watch a football game. Man, oh man, I'm glad that they're winning games. I'm glad, I'm excited, but I'm also glad that we get a bye week to kind of step away, tell your loved ones, pro tip, tell them this weekend is devoted to them. Anything they want to do this weekend, it's up to them. Make sure to give them all the TLC you can as we get into the holidays, Adam.
I coordinated with the NFL, and it's never easy to get hold of Roger Goodell on things like this. But my significant other, Courtney, her birthday will be this upcoming weekend. And I said, listen, Raj, first name, nickname basis. I said, listen, Raj, can we just go ahead and kind of set this table the right way for yours truly? And honestly, it didn't even take a lot of negotiating. He was pretty happy to do it.
Well, I think you're thinking about it the wrong way. You need to now go to your significant other and say, listen, football doesn't matter on a weekend as important as this weekend. This is all about you. So whenever and however the games are on, I
Sure.
want the focus to be on you rather than talk about the fact the Giants are on a bye week, right?
Peeling back the curtain here, Andy believes in lying. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just a choice that people make in their lives. Listen, at the end of the day, the New York Football Giants are on the bye, but as I said at the top, there are a handful of things that really matter here. So here's why it's completely insane. The Giants are 4-8, and you go, listen, are they really competing for anything? Does it really matter? I guess probably not, right? We saw the Packers beat the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving. That shocked the world. But here's the deal. From the 8th team, which is the Packers, and obviously the wild card matters. That's the Vikings. That's the big goal. But the Packers are 5-6, as are the Rams, as are the Saints, and then you have the Bucks at 4-7, and the New York Football Giants at 4-8. That, between my hard math, makes them one win away from being right on the edge of that bubble. So when you look at the upcoming games this weekend, you're going to have Detroit going to New Orleans. You want to see Detroit get that win. You're going to have the Carolina Panthers visiting the Bucks. You'd like to see upset special Carolina trying to get some work done for us. And then you have Kansas City visiting Green Bay, which, I mean, listen, feels like, even though I hate to say that finally my Jordan Love kind of hype may be coming around a little bit here, could be a very losable game for Green Bay. 3 out of those 4 teams are in prime positions here to lose. And then the Giants could be coming out of the bye week playing the Green Bay Packers saying, hey, if we win this game, it won't look pretty at 5-8, but everybody else could be right in the same boat with us. And it depends on then ultimately what happens with the Vikings.
So, Adam, you laid it out pretty good. I want to continue to build upon what you just said. So,
Please.
as it sits today, the New York Giants, out of all 16 teams in the NFC, ranked 12th based on schedule and everything else that's going on, matchups, conference division records, all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they are 12th, but like you mentioned, they're 2 games out of 7th, which is the playoff picture. What's fascinating is the 8th team, 9th team, and 10th team are the Packers, Rams, and Saints. These are all teams that the Giants have literally coming up on their schedule. If you were a Giants fan and you were hoping that they could make the playoffs, this is what you'd want. You want a 2-for-1. You want to be able to play these teams to get a loss on them while winning and gaining traction against each of them. If the Giants win those 3 games, which I'm not saying they will, but if they did, they would
Sure.
really have a legitimate chance of making the playoffs at that point, especially because of 2 other things that you mentioned. But what were you going to say, Adam?
Well, I was going to say they would legitimately have a chance to be at least competing against these teams and playing against the bubble. The big factor here, if we're going to go down this road, and guess what? We're going to go down the top draft pick road as well here in just a moment for teams you want to watch in that regard. It comes down to the Minnesota Vikings because we're talking about everybody up to, but not including the final wild card spot. It may also include the Seattle Seahawks, who are taking a bit of a tumble of their own here right now. The Minnesota Vikings are going to go to Vegas to play the Raiders. You could say, hey, that's a winnable game, but they got a pretty good defense. Some things are trying to work out there. They go to Cincinnati. That's kind of a bummer with no Burrow now for them. But then they'll have Detroit division battle, Green Bay division battle, and then Detroit again. So no matter what, you would think that Detroit really is going to need those games because it looks like they're at least going to be staying in the hunt for that number 1 seed, depending on how things shake out. And they got to at least push teams back from them inside of the NFC North. There's a world where when you look over these final 5 games for the Minnesota Vikings, you could say 2 and 3 is not off the table for them, right? Something has to happen here. You got to get a loss in there somewhere maybe you don't expect, but 2 and 3 isn't off the table. So that makes 9 wins the job. The goal here would be for any team that wanted, and I'm not even, let's not exclusively make it about the Giants. Any team that wants to get into that wild card spot, it looks like 9 wins is going to be the number.
Adam, the thing about the Minnesota Vikings, because we point to them at being in the last and final playoff spot, is they also don't even know what they're going to do at quarterback. Like the Joshua Dobbs story was great. And then he goes out in a game that
For
they
a bit.
should absolutely win against the Chicago Bears, and he throws 4 interceptions, right? Like
But that's
completely
about
laying
that's
a
about
goose
the
egg, right?
QB fraternity, you know what I mean? Because he knows Justin Fields. There's been a lot of negative talk around him. He understands what his job is.
So, well, and then they asked Kevin O'Connell, the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, like, is Joshua Dobbs your quarterback? He's like, well, we'll evaluate everything. And so when you talk about the Minnesota Vikings, they have to choose from Joshua Dobbs, who just threw 4 interceptions, Nick
That's right.
Mullins, or Jaron Hall. Those are the 3 people that they have in the building to lead them.
I
And you
love it.
mentioned, like, the Raiders aren't a cupcake. They're not necessarily one of the best teams in the league, but they certainly pummeled the Giants, and they were competitive with the Chiefs for at least half the game.
Yeah.
But you did mention one other team, and that is the Seattle Seahawks. They are in a
Yes.
free fall right now, Adam. They beat the Giants, but their schedule is brutal coming up. Their next 3 games are at Dallas, at San Francisco, and hosting the Philadelphia Eagles in their next 3 games. They're not going to be favored in any of them. They could get blown out by double digits in all of them. That would literally be 3 straight losses. I'm more worried about Seattle being able to continue what they're trying to do to make the playoffs than Minnesota, even with that crazy quarterback situation.
I both agree with you, and then also I think you did a very clever job there. The next 3 games for Seattle, at Dallas, at San Francisco, home for Philly. You backed out the part where their final 3 games are at Tennessee, home against the Pittsburgh Steelers, though against almost seemingly all statistical odds, they are still winning football games. And then they finish on the road at Arizona. Now it's Arizona, obviously getting back Kyler Murray, so that changes the complexion a little bit. But their last 3 games, you'd say, as maybe losable as the next 3 are, the last 3 are very winnable. So, and again, and by the way, I think both of these teams it's a good spot for the Giants, good spot for the Packers, for the Rams, for any of these teams, right? Even the Saints included, though they're mostly going to be flip flopping potentially with the Falcons for the division lead. The bottom line is when you look at that, even say, put it that way, that's 9 wins for Seattle. Now, here's the problem in that scenario, and probably actually why you want Seattle to stay up there if you can, because the Giants don't have the head to head against Seattle. So, it's one of 2 things. Either you think Seattle's only going to win 8 games in total the rest, over the course of this season, and that's the end of it, or you think that there's this path where they could possibly just keep themselves up there and the Giants can overtake the Vikings 1-to-1 with some of these other things. By the way, we should also make the little note here that I can do the hard math. The New York Football Giants have 8 losses. There's 17 games in a season. And if we say that 9 is the number, that means the New York Football Giants can't lose a single football game. And this is where we do just, at least I personally, take a big step back and say, in the end, I just like that the Giants are playing competitive football, that they're winning some football games on Sunday. And that if you go forward right now with the Giants and they come out and they beat the Packers and maybe they end up beating the Saints and say they lose to the Rams because they at least have some pedigree there on their roster. Okay, fine. But I can look back and reflect on a team that might finish 7-10 or maybe 8-9 and say, hey, there was a lot of value in the back half of this season. That ultimately is what it's about here. And the way the schedule sets up, the next few weeks is exciting for the Giants after the bye.
Yeah, listen, and we talked about the tankathon situation early on when the Giants lost a few games and they looked futile and Daniel Jones went down. After that
Yep.
Raiders game, everyone said, "Lose out. We're in the Drake May, Caleb Williams sweepstakes," and that was
Sure.
literally halfway through the season. And Adam, that's why we kind of pumped the brakes on that whole thing. Like it's one thing to want to just cancel all the rest of the games and hope that you just finish with 2 wins, but the team is good enough to be able to compete and win some of these football games. You look at how the defense is playing, albeit against inferior offenses like the
Yeah.
Patriots, for instance. The Giants are good enough to win these football games. They now sit sixth in the overall rankings. Joe Shane would have to spend tremendous draft capital to go get one of those quarterbacks if that's really what you want to do. But keep in mind, like the Giants have some potential winnable games remaining on the schedule with non-playoff teams, as we mentioned before, and the Giants could very easily win a couple more games on their schedule, which would probably
Even
put
just
them
that, by the way, even just 6 wins, right? Like
right.
we're painting all the pictures here for you. But even if they just win a couple more and end up being a 6-11 team, it still could back you out significantly in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the 5 and 6 right now is the Cincinnati Bengals, and they're picking 15th. That's one game better than what the Giants are right now. So every win does have either consequences one way or potential on the other side. And it is razor thin. It's such a weird situation to be in where a win can get you closer to the playoffs, but like some people are still wanting losses because it keeps you in that top 7 or 8 picks to be able to get either a top offensive tackle, a potential quarterback, a wide receiver that you want, any of those things. It is just a strange place to be. But while we're here, Adam, I think you and I can both agree. Just win every game on the schedule at this point. Until you tell me that they're completely done, win every game.
Well, it's why when you say, because you mentioned about being in sixth position, and ahead of them is now the Washington Commanders, the Chicago Bears, the Patriots, who they just beat. They're a 2-9 team, and the Arizona Cardinals are 2-10. Now, in the upcoming schedule, Arizona is going to go to Pittsburgh. Again, not an easy team to play, but it's a different type of Arizona Cardinal team. And they seem, at least perceptually, they seem willing to go out and try to win some games. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. The Chargers, who just fired their, going to fire their head coach here, that's going to be interesting playing New England, though New England doesn't seem interested in playing football either. Like, so these are some of the games. And then Carolina, honestly, I find it fascinating, the Carolina game, just from a high level. Carolina, whose pick is going to go to Chicago, so they have no reason to lose games. So they've been trying, and it hasn't been working out. They also fired their head coach and Frank Reich. Like Carolina, do I think that they could come up on Tampa Bay here and get kind of a little bit of a later season boost for themselves? Sure, why not? Because Tampa Bay can't seem to get out of its own way lately. So there's these handful of games that you're watching there, right? But we also mentioned when we talk about all that schedule that lays out there, the teams that are in that mix, Tampa Bay, by the way, is seventh, just behind the Giants. So Tampa Bay winning would be a good thing if that's what you're voting for here. If they were to lose, though, all of a sudden that could rotate. We mentioned teams like Vegas, New Orleans, Green Bay, LA. They're right there from 11 to 14. And then you said Cincinnati at 15. That's the bottom line here. There is a pretty big muck up depending on how the rest of the season goes. Where winning 4 or 5 or 6 games is probably going to put you in this really big hodgepodge anywhere from 6th or 7th all the way down to 15th or 16th. And at that point, a player like some people have said, okay, first it's a quarterback. Well, guess what? There's too much football to play. And unless, by the way, just not even a caveat, but just a reality. When Joe Shane said we're trading Leonard Williams and that was all that they did, that was the signal that this team was still going to have a competitive team that was going to fall into some wins along the way. Otherwise, you move heaven and earth to take away as much talent as possible so that it's all like the Patriots. They're not a good team. They don't have enough talent. They're dragging quarterbacks in and out. Guess what? We're going to lose a bunch, right? Like that's the reality. So now as you turn forward, though, okay, now no quarterback. Okay, fine. Offensive tackle. There's one there in the top 10. I think out of Notre Dame. Okay. No,
Sure.
now hold on now. Now it's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. Well, guess what? There's a world where you finish 14th or something in the draft, and you're going to miss out on him too. So until we know, until the games are all played, let's find out. Right? There's tons of talented players, and we'll dive into that when it comes up. But at this moment right now, it's a bye week for the Giants, where depending on how things shake out, it'll at least make another week or two really interesting for Giants. And hopefully, I think, for the fan base, unless you're one of those sadistic freaks that just wants losses all across the world.
And coming off the bye week, Adam, the
Yes.
Giants will take on the Packers in a basically feels like an elimination game for the two teams. If you have any thoughts of being in the playoffs, right? Based on
Yes,
who Green
especially
Bay
if Green Bay is against Kansas City, right? If they're
I- I-
4-7 at that point.
exactly. They're 5-6. They'd be five and
Oh, sorry, 5
seven.
and 7. Yeah.
Yeah, they'd be 5-7. The Giants would win and get to 5-7,
Yeah.
have the tiebreaker against the Packers head to head. It would feel like a very difficult challenge. But there are a lot of questions going into this bye week, Adam. And the number
Oh,
one that seems to be popping up around everyone and was asked about the health of Tyrod Taylor. They said he's got a good chance to come back after the bye week, him and Darren Waller as well, coming off of a couple of different injuries previously. Now, Adam, here's the question I have for you. Who
Mhm.
should start at quarterback if both Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito are healthy and available?
Yeah, this is the tricky one. By the way, 92.4 rating for Tommy DeVito, 92.1 for Tyrod Taylor. Like nothing between these two guys over the course of the season where they've played at. And Tommy DeVito has improved his completion percentage. So it's 63 to 65 for Tyrod Taylor. The teams they've played against are a little bit different. You can make the case, I think, as you did when Daniel Jones first went down and Tyrod came in and looked like everything played a little bit better. You could say, yeah, well, everything was playing a little bit better, right? The offensive line looked a little better. Now you bring in a Justin Pugh. So, things have improved, a little more Jalen Hyatt, right? So you could make the case that the team has slowly gotten better this year and the quarterback play has benefited from that. If you if you believe that Tommy DeVito has a real world chance to be your backup quarterback next year, then you should play him because you want to get every sample size you can to prove that. If you think that it's been a nice story and your team has won some games and you're Brian Dable and you want to keep winning symbolic games here, then I think I go with Tyrod Taylor because there's a significant track record there, albeit marred with some injuries, of a quarterback that knows how to lead a team, not make mistakes, and make some winning plays. And I think this year's sample size is a little bit skewed based on which teams each of these quarterbacks has gone against.
Adam, I love disagreeing with you,
Thank
embracing
you.
debate, but
Yes.
I couldn't agree with you more in this
You
situation.
can't you can't
And
break perfection.
it's hard because also the advanced metrics, the things that we were looking at, you talked about, passer rating being relatively similar. Even their yards per attempt is 6.7 for Tyrod Taylor, 6.6 for Tommy DeVito. So they're
Yep.
both pushing the ball down the field relatively similar. It's like there's nothing really distinguishing the two where you immediately would say it. But I think that that what you said about whether or not Tommy DeVito has a chance to be a backup, even if he has a chance to be the third string and compete for a
Sure.
backup role next season. Listen, Tyrod Taylor is 34 years old. He will be a free agent at the end of the year. If you plan on bringing Tyrod back and saying, "Hey, we don't know if Daniel's going to be available. We're going to give you the keys to the kingdom for the first two games because you know the offense and we'll see how Daniel progresses." Maybe we draft a quarterback, who knows? Then I could see
Right.
you saying, "Yeah, we're going to try to bring back Tyrod Taylor." But you have Tommy DeVito, who is significantly younger. He's 25 years old, right? He's started to show a little bit more of a progression from the first game where he threw for -1 yards. He's actually showing that he's learning the system. He's understanding how to play within himself, and they continue to open up the playbook, as you saw with some of the deep shots to Jalen Hyatt. So I think the other thing is Tommy DeVito is under team control at the minimum for 3 years. You
Yes.
have him in the building under team control. Why wouldn't you want to see what you have? Like the problem is if Tyrod Taylor does decently, then he costs more money to bring him back, and you don't have him under team control, and you're probably not going to make the playoffs anyway, right?
Well, so that's so see, here's the big part of it, and this is why I think it's a both and because you mentioned I don't think Tyrod Taylor is back. I think the best thing that happens for Tyrod over the back of the season is that he makes himself available for another team, right? Someone that wants to spend a little more money. I don't think Joe Shane wants to spend 11 million a year again on him in particular. Now, the weird part is though, you said Tommy DeVito under control. Right. He's under control. So whether we play him or not, he's not going anywhere. We could also evaluate him throughout the offseason. We can evaluate him, going into training camp next year. And I think to your point, the most realistic thing for Tommy DeVito, I think, is that you could be the third string guy, right? Maybe competing for the backup. Depends on what the Giants do. Veteran, draft a rookie at any point in the draft. Okay, all those things, right? So now live game action you can't simulate, right? But I this is where again, if it's about winning football games, the other metric I'll point to is that Tommy DeVito has like a 14 QBR. and Tyrod Taylor has like a 39. And it's, if you go game by game, it's not like, oh boy, he had a real clunker, but then Tommy DeVito soared. Even in the games he's won, the QBR has been like, I don't know how he pulled that off. And a lot of it has been defensively predicated about the team ultimately getting these W's.
Well, it's also about fumbles, like the handoff to Wandale Robinson
Yeah.
on that jet sweep. They credit that to Tommy DeVito, which gave him a single digit QBR in his last game, which I
Yeah.
think anyone watching was like, I think he played a little better than that. I
I am
there's,
having, we've said this before. The QBR thing is starting to throw me for a little bit of a loop here lately. There's some, you look across the NFL overall, like there's some times where you go, I thought that QBR was like situational football, and it just, I don't know, something doesn't seem to be checking here.
Yeah, the situation they take situational football into account, but not the actual situation itself. It's like if he was just in the
Right.
pocket and he got strip sacked and they ran it back, like yeah, that was his fault. On a jet sweep where the wide receiver doesn't handle it, they count that the same way.
Right.
There's two more things I want to talk about on the Tommy versus Tyrod thing. One
Oh,
is,
okay.
can Tyrod Taylor, if you're going to go into the draft and you're going to draft a quarterback, you have Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah.
Can Tommy DeVito also potentially be the starter for the first couple of games next season, as you either bring in a rookie QB or you bring along Daniel Jones's health? Because if he can potentially be that guy, then you need to get him as many reps as you possibly can, right?
Yes. And the other part of this too is if you go back to Joe Shane's press conference, he said obviously Tyrod, his contract's up, and we don't know about Daniel Jones when he return. He didn't really mention Tommy DeVito when talking about the quarterback room. He's like, obviously we got to go and address the QB room no matter what, whether
Well, he
it's for
said we
this
have
reason.
Tommy under contract, so like
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah,
obviously got to go
exactly. Yeah.
address things because Daniel's going to be hurt. Tyrod's not here. Tommy, we have, but like, what's it going to happen? The last thing I'll
Right.
say on
Yeah.
Tyrod Taylor, listen, if they decide to go with Tyrod Taylor, you know what's going to happen? Tyrod Taylor is going to get hurt, and Tommy DeVito is going to come in and play again at some point this season because that's how it works
Yeah.
with Tyrod Taylor. He gets injured because he's trying to make plays or do something else. So even if they pick Tyrod, expect to see Tommy DeVito in some capacity the rest of the season.
I would assume so, right? I mean, 7 games this year for the New York Football Giants. And listen, there's a lot of different reasons based on injuries and starter, backup, whatever. But that's the 8 going back to the Chargers in 2019 was the most games that he appeared in all the way back to the last 5, 6 seasons, right? So there's a reason for that, whether it's because there's a starter ahead of you or because when you've had your chances, as he did have with the Chargers and ultimately got injured due to a freak non-football related injury when he's trying to have a little shot administered. That being the case, whatever they choose to do, I also think you'll get a little bit of glimmer as to how the Giants think about things, Brian Dable, Joe Shane. Because again, a lot of the numbers would tell you that Tommy DeVito is a great story, but maybe not best suited to actually win you football games with consistency. So Tyrod would be the option if you want to win. And by the way, those games that we said keep an eye on, that actually could influence this too, potentially. It can make it very easy to say, hey, Tommy, go out there and sling it until the cows come home because 3 out of the 4 teams ahead of us all won on our bye week. So guess what? It's a lot harder for us to climb that mountain. In that vein, Andy, when we turn our attention over to the fan duel, first and foremost, we said it, not only a division rival in the Dallas Cowboys, but that Seattle Seahawks team. It's why maybe there's some hope for that downfall. They play on Thursday night. Seattle on the road in Dallas, +9. +9 is the spread, +330 on the money line, and over under of 47.5. Do you just feel like, I hate to, you know, lump in the throat when you say it, but boy, they're going the wrong way. Geno Smith has had some injuries. And I'm sorry, Dallas has looked good. Like Dallas looks like a damn good team right now, especially even on the defensive side of the ball, where they got a guy like Bland who's in the conversation for defensive MVP because that's how good he's played, even though he likely won't win it.
I mean, it's a sad state of affairs, but do you see much of a difference right now in the level of football that the Washington Commanders are playing to the Seattle Seahawks? Because I don't. They look pretty
Yeah.
much like the same team, knowing that they have their challenges on defense. Forbes doesn't, their first round cornerback doesn't look to be doing great. The Seattle Seahawks just benched Tariq Woolen, their potential Pro Bowler from last season, the late round draft pick. They're going the wrong way. This feels like it could be just an absolute obliteration by the Cowboys. There's no Kenneth Walker. He's not expected to play. He's going to be out for a couple weeks for the Seattle Seahawks. They're going to be starting Zach Charbonnet. Man, oh man, they need every single player healthy to have a chance. This feels like the Cowboys are going to continue to roll. And to be honest with you, that kind of helps the Giants because they're not going to catch the Cowboys anyway.
Yeah, 100%, right? I mean, like I say, and if you're ahead of the Giants inside of the wild card bracket, everyone you want them to lose just to keep things interesting. I agree with you. I would lay the points. I'm not going to verbalize I would take team X, but I'll just say I would take the points. I mean, I would lay the points, excuse me. I would lay the points in this one without verbalizing which team I believe in. And I would probably take the over as well, even at 47.5. I just think Dallas is playing some darn good football right now. And combined with Seattle is playing some really bad football and has some key players, as you mentioned, being out there. If we roll our attention over to the weekend, then just to kind of spotlight some of these, we said we want a 1 o'clock game, Detroit at the Saints. That's a big one. It's the Saints getting 4.5. That number even seems like a little bit low to me. I know Detroit kind of laid a goose egg on Thursday night. That game there, and then we could even combine looking down the line here a little bit, getting into that second window, maybe the biggest one to keep an eye on before the Green Bay matchup. Rams obviously hosting, but Cleveland Browns. This is where you're looking at rookie quarterbacks, backup bodies everywhere, and saying, is the Cleveland defense so good that they can just by themselves, maybe like the Giants have done a couple of times, win a football game?
You mentioned the Rams. That is the game I am most interested to look at over the course of the weekend. Now, obviously, San Francisco versus Philadelphia is the game where the best football
If you're
will
just
be
watching
played.
some good football, sure,
Yeah,
sure,
like you
sure.
want to watch good football, that's the game you want to watch. For ramifications and implications for the Giants, the Rams game is the one that I'm circling because Cleveland Brown defense is tremendous. They're incredible. If they're not one of the top two, they're top three defenses in the entire league. Myles Garrett
Yeah.
is unbelievable. We don't know if he's going to play. That would be a huge loss for the Browns. But keep in mind, the Rams are only a couple of years removed from winning a Super Bowl. They are ahead of the Giants in the playoff standings. If the Browns can somehow go in there and win a game, the Giants would be victorious on a bye week without even having to play a game. That one is huge to me. I'm going to be watching that one intently at 425.
Yeah, and honestly, from a high level, the Rams in that game are a -3.5 at home against Cleveland. So again, with no real quarterback play, no disrespect to the rookie, but it's interesting to watch that game because the Rams are the kind of team. I mean, think about the playoff picture in the NFC, right? You're scratching your head, you're saying, "Oh, geez, look at the mess of teams," right? And we talk about teams falling off the cliff here. The Vikings have no quarterback. The Seattle Seahawks are fading. I tell you what, you wouldn't want though, if you're one of those teams that's up there to go, oh, look, Matthew Stafford and the Rams snuck into the playoffs as the final wild card, right? Like you would look at a lot and probably every other team. You would definitely look at the Saints first, the Bucks, the Giants, and then even the Packers as well as maybe as far down as you would want to go in terms of the hierarchy. Like, but the Rams are the last team I think that anybody would want to see in that playoff picture in the NFC. So that makes for a fascinating one for sure. I mentioned that Detroit game. Obviously, keep an eye on that just from a Saints perspective, and if they're going to lose, and then beyond that, what's the one other game that you want? Well, you know what? I'll go this way. I'll go top of the draft if you just want to hedge your bets. That Chargers Patriots game at least has top of the draft implications. The Giants beat the Patriots. Let's assume, though, that maybe a feel good win for the Chargers, new coach, blah, 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 blah. Patriots probably going to keep themselves ahead of them. I don't see a lot of movement here of where the Giants get back ahead of a team there. Although maybe you're going to talk about Washington here.
Well, no, listen. So Washington has to host Miami, and they're almost 10-point
Loss.
underdogs in that game. You expect them to lose that game. You look at
Yeah.
Kansas City going to Green Bay. Green Bay is getting 6 points. They are underdogs against Kansas City. If the board falls the way that the spreads are indicating, with the exception of the Rams game, the Giants would potentially have 3 out of 4 of the games that they need to go the right way go the
Yeah.
right way. But there's one game that kind of has Giants implications that I'm
Here
just
we go.
genuinely curious about, Adam, and that is the New York Jets hosting the Atlanta Falcons. One, because the Falcons are still a little bit in the playoff mix, obviously, because the NFC South, somebody has to make
A
the playoffs
little
from there.
bit. They're leading the division, Andy.
Right. But like someone under 500 is going to win that division.
By the
And
way,
why
by the
not
way,
Atlanta?
here's a fun little nugget. I think I saw this. The Carolina Panthers are not mathematically eliminated from making the playoffs because the team leading their division has only 5 wins.
That
Yeah.
is unbelievable. I didn't hear that. That makes my jaw drop. Like
Storm of the
imagine they
century,
imagine
Carolina.
they just like roll off 7 wins and they finish 8 and 9 and all of a sudden or
Why
like
not,
whatever it
baby?
is, like unbelievable. Um, but the other piece of that is just, for New York purposes, the
Sure.
Jets want to win games because Aaron Rodgers just was activated to be able to practice, and they opened up his 21-day window to be able to come back. Now, I think it's absolute lunacy that he would participate in a football game at any point during the remainder of this season. But
Sure.
if the Jets can win against the Falcons, they can potentially stay alive for that last playoff berth. And you're only a couple weeks away from Rodgers potentially returning. That to me just adds a little bit more intrigue. So if the Jets win, it hurts Atlanta. It also gives us a one step closer to seeing Aaron Rodgers pull off something that was unthinkable 79 days ago.
So yeah, Falcons, and then so here's why. If you want to get, if listen, we did it for the Giants. Let's do it for our in stadium brothers, right? If you want to get interested in this, were the Jets to pull off this victory and help the Giants out as well, and help the Carolina Panthers, the next week is against the Houston Texans, who happen to be sitting at the top of the bubble in 8th position right now. So, like, the Jets, if you think Aaron Rodgers can play football, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more interesting than talking about, Tim Boyle trying to make some hay here. They then go division game in Miami. They'll finish out their season. Commanders, very winnable game. Cleveland Browns, certainly a strong defense, but winnable. And then the Patriots. Like, as insane as it sounds, losing 4 in a row, as the Jets have, if Aaron Rodgers can come back at some point, not for this game, but maybe for I think they eyed at one point the Dolphins game. I honestly don't even think he's going to play necessarily, but go out there and win this football game, and it makes it interesting. Like, I think this has been the biggest propaganda that we've ever seen in our lives, and a really good thing for Aaron Rodgers next year is if this team loses the rest of their games and gets a top draft pick to do whatever they want with. However, for the narrative's sake, maybe the Jets get a little juice here, right? Should they go back to Zach Wilson? Should it be
Adam,
Zach Wilson revival?
Adam, at the end of the day, New York
Yeah,
football is interesting because you sit
it's
here
a
and you
real
have
sweet spot, Andy.
You have the Giants at 4-8, the Jets at 4-7. It's been abysmal.
Tim Boyle, Tommy DeVito.
They've both lost
like
their starting quarterbacks to brutal season-ending injuries, and yet people are still looking at the schedule saying, if I squint hard enough, maybe there's an opportunity for us to make a run here.
Maybe only you and I for the Giants, and maybe only the most sadistic of Jets fans. But listen, that's what football's about, right? Your team has to go out and play these games. Why not root for wins? We just broke it all down for you. The Giants are going to be the 6th seed eventually here. That's just the way that goes. And the Jets are going to the Super Bowl.
If anyone wants to know how crazy we are, just as a finishing thought, Adam, most of the people that project who's going to make the playoffs give the Giants anywhere between a 0.1 and 1% chance to make the playoffs this season.
Well, as my friend Lloyd Christmas would say, so you're telling me there's a chance. Until next time, guys. You get us over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast, over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, and at Adam Armbrecht, and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. Until then, though, as Andy Macowitz would want, need, and nay, demand you the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.